and so minute, it was completely ineffectual. The governments didn't really care when one person suddenly said, oh, this is weird, or this is wrong. And it was very easy to label those people conspiracy theorists, and for the rest of the world to accept that analysis, to just say, oh yeah, they're conspiracy theorists, like obviously. And because they assumed that they themselves were educated. I'm reading the New York Times, I'm reading the Washington Post. I learned this information from a doctor, and this person who is saying otherwise is a quack. So it was easier for the governments to maintain the narrative. With the birth of social media, that has completely disappeared. It is so gone. The governments are now trying to go backwards and to create authoritarianism on the web, because they're realizing that so many of their narratives are falling apart in real time. It's not so easy to tell a lie in the generation of smartphones, to make up a narrative, to say that something happened, when in real time someone can send a video from overseas and say, actually, that's a lie. And people, individuals, not governments, are breaking stories about what's happening overseas, about what politicians are doing wrong behind the scenes. People are able to break these stories because we no longer rely on the media to tell us what's happening. We can say what's happening in real time. So that really is the gift of social media. That really is the gift of us living in this information age. And so, for me, so many people have asked my story in terms of how I got this passionate about childhood vaccinations. And, my story is one of those things where I always say that in my life, every time something horrible has happened to me, I was so angry when I was young at God, like, why me? Why do I have to grow up and be poor? Why do I have to, grow up and have these various issues in my family? Why do I have to have this happen to me? It was so woe is me. And now that I'm older, every single thing that happened to me, I thank God for. And I realize that God's plan is sometimes just so much bigger than our own. And those moments that we think are so terrible are actually Him attempting to enlighten us. And, I had a horrible thing happen to me with a vaccine injury with HPV. And I've talked about this multiple times on my show. I will drop the monologue for that show. I also talked about polio and other statistics that many parents may not be aware of. But I will reshare the story now, because that was a major question that people were asking me. When I was about 20 years old is when the HPV vaccine Gardasil hit the scene. And people that are my age, I'm 32 years old, will remember this. It was an aggressive propaganda, that was hitting our TV screens. And they kept saying to women that you should get this vaccine because it prevents cervical cancer. And obviously, the second you hear cancer, it scares you. It scares you to your bone. So I went to my gynecologist. I think I had just gotten back from college. And I said to the doctor, I was just doing a regular routine annual checkup. And he said to me, you should get this vaccine, this new vaccine that came out. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's for HPV. It's, it's an STD that people get that leads to cervical cancer. That was the airtight narrative that they had. And I said, okay, great. Give me the vaccine. No questions asked, just bubbly. Of course, the doctor knows that this is good. And of course, if you say cancer, this can avoid cancer, who's not going to take it? Especially someone who's, 19, 20 years old. I mean, maybe I was 18. I don't know. I think it was actually even younger. I think I might have been 18 years old. It was in 2008, I think. And, he comes, the nurse comes back in with the needle, and she injects me, and I instantly passed out and hit the ground. I never pass out. I am not a person that passes out. I don't faint. I don't have a light stomach. I have passed out in my life. I can count three times that I've passed out in my life. So it was just insane. I hit the ground so quickly. And, when I came to, the doctor and the nurse were like, oh, it's okay. Are you okay? And then I was like, yeah, totally out of it. And he was like, did you eat breakfast this morning? And I said, no, I haven't eaten breakfast this morning. And he said, oh, that's why. That's what happened. Let us get you some water, sit down, calm down. And, next time, because it's a 3-part series, now this is a 3-part shot. When you come in for your second dose, make sure you eat breakfast. Okay, fine. Weird thing. Thought it was weird. Should have signaled to me that something was odd here. But I, of course, just accepted that very quick analysis that that's what happened. The next time when it was time for me to get my second HPV vaccine, Gardasil vaccine, I ate breakfast that morning. So that issue was dealt with. And I went there, and literally she gave me the injection. I was sitting there, and suddenly started seeing things in my eye. And what I remember is I just passed out. And when I hit the ground, when I started to come to, my body started convulsing, shaking. And never had this. The only way to describe it is as like a mini seizure I was having. And I could see the doctors above me. And when I got up, I started vomiting on them, like just instantly vomiting. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. They were all holding me on the ground. Like, I am not a person. I don't have any issues, any past issues with convulsions, seizures, nothing like that. Now here I am passing out again a second time in this office, and I'm now throwing up and vomiting all over this person. This is just not me. I didn't even vomit when I was pregnant. You know what I mean? I have a very settled stomach. So this time you could see that the two doctors, there were two male doctors and there was a nurse in the room. They were freaked out. And he said, you know what, you need to suspend this vaccination series. You're obviously having a reaction to this. This is not something that you should continue. And I wish he had said that during the first shot, but of course he waited until the second shot. And I started crying because I was scared. I am. I'm very young. I don't really know what's going on. I'm crying hysterically in this office. I'm surrounded by two men. It happened to be two male gynecologists. And when I got out of there, obviously they made me sit down and like made sure I was okay. Because at the time I was driving, I was very just instantly processing in my head that didn't even know what HPV was. HPV when I was growing up was not an STD that we learned about in school. Like, so this STD was new, right? Like, we learned about herpes, learned about all these different STDs in school and health class. We never learned anything about HPV. So didn't know anything about HPV. I couldn't tell you anything about that STD. And yet I had blindly walked in and decided to get this vaccination against an STD, which doesn't even really make sense because you can also just have protected sex to protect against STDs. And I started researching independently, like, what even is HPV? And I was absolutely shocked at what I discovered. And so, like, the numbers that I'm giving you right now are current. I'm going to bring it to 2021 because because it's on the CDC's website and you can go look it up and you can verify everything that I'm saying. First and foremost, something for you to know is that HPV, this new STD, I guess, or maybe they just discovered this STD, clears up by itself, and the majority of people are asymptomatic, so they have no symptoms, they don't even know they have it, and it clears up by itself in 90% of people that have it. Okay, so 90% of people that get HPV just clears up, don't need any medicine, it's not like all the other STDs where you have to go in and you have to take, pills or go on anything. This one just clears up by itself and you don't have any symptoms. So they found this thing, but whatever. So they said the reason that when I was young, was that it can lead to cervical cancers. If you go on the CDC website right now and you look up how many people are getting cervical cancer from HPV, they don't have a direct link or a direct answer. It says, and I'm not kidding, on the CDC website, probably about 11,000 women are getting cervical cancer that comes from the HPV strain, probably. I mean, just even using that language, probably 11,000 women per year. Okay, in total, women that are getting diagnosed with cervical cancer per year it's about 14,000 people. So this is now something that every woman in America, I mean, we live in a nation of 330 million people, and half of those people are women. So, figure 180 million people are being told they have to should take this vaccine, right? And yet, what turns out that only 11,000 are probably getting a cervical cancer from this strain of an STD. And then beyond that, how many women per year die of cervical cancer? And all cervical cancers, not the ones that are just from HPV. If you check the CDC website for 2021 statistics, it's about 4,200 women per year die of cervical cancer. It is just not a common form of cancer. So if I had known all of that, I would have never ever said yes to getting this vaccine. Obviously, I've never said yes to getting this vaccine. That is to the point of being negligible. On my show, I did the math. There was like 5 zeros in a row in terms of your probability of getting an HPV-led cancer, an HPV-led cervical cancer. It's insane, right? And so that's the first thing that was crazy. Then, as I got older, the commercial started changing. So this was an aggressive campaign that was about cervical cancer and about what women should do to protect themselves from getting cervical cancer. Suddenly, I got older a few years later and had this horrible experience and had, really bad, by the way, after that, like fatigue, like waking up became so problematic for me. Like I just didn't feel right after getting that vaccine. I didn't feel like myself. It took years for me to be able to even feel like myself after getting that vaccine. Like having the same energy is the best way that I can describe it. But years later, suddenly the commercials changed and they're pivoted towards men. And that was confusing for me. So you imagine, like, I got this vaccine because I'm told it's going to save us from cervical cancer or prevent us from getting cervical cancer. And yet now they're gearing it towards men. And the commercials are saying, like, there's little boys, they're using little children that are like, I'm so grateful. I wish my mother had given me the HPV vaccine. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten cancer in 10 years. Maybe I wouldn't have died from cancer. Like really creepy, hard-hitting commercials of young boys now saying that they wish their parents had given them the HPV vaccine. Like a very sick propagandist commercial, big pharma commercial. And obviously, if you're looking at me, I'm like, this makes no sense to me because you told us it was for cervical cancer. So why are boys now suddenly supposed to get this shot? And also, why is there a kid in this commercial? Because it's an STD. So why would a child need to get this, this series of shots? That doesn't make sense. At least, I was in college. I think it was my first year of college. I think it was like 2008 when I got mine. So you could say, oh, okay, like, teenagers are sexually active. I could not fathom why suddenly it was young children. And so if you fast forward to today and you understand all of these facts, you have first and foremost, is it an STD? It makes entirely no sense to me to mandate a vaccine for an STD when people can choose to not have sex. People can choose to use condoms. You're mandating a vaccination and an aggressive one, 3 series. And you're now focusing on children. Do kids have sex? I mean, are 5-year-olds having sex? And I ask you that question not because I'm saying they're trying to mandate this, like, suddenly eyeing children. It's because they're quite literally attempting to pass legislation to mandate this vaccination. If you think it's crazy that they're going after boys, now in New York City in 2019, they attempted to pass legislation that would mandate the HPV vaccine series for babies. For infants going into daycare. In order to get into daycare in New York City, your child would have to have the HPV vaccine. Do you understand how crazy that is? Like, I can't even put into words to you how deeply this upsets me, knowing that me as an adult passed out from this shot, the first one and the second one, woke up, came to, threw up, and you are now telling me that in New York City, these legislatures are attempting to pass this for infants in time for them to go to daycare, like for babies going to daycare, for daycare and for, obviously above. So they want to make sure you have start this vaccination series when you're going into daycare. That is a crime. Like there's literally no other way to say it. And when you ask yourself, knowing all of these facts, why they would be doing this, the answer is because Big Pharma, as I shared in a previous slide for you guys, spends billions and billions of dollars on your politicians. These politicians are not out examining the facts. These politicians are clearing checks. They find these politicians when they're first campaigning, and they give them tons of money. And the payback for that money is to make sure that they pass through legislation that is beneficial to the big pharma companies. That is an evil, and it is a sin. So when I hear all of these parents that are asking me questions about, well, what about school? Where I live or whatever, like they say that you have to have vaccinations or you can't go to school or you can't do this, you can't do that. What you are watching in real time is big pharma dollars that have impacted the politics in your area, right? So why else would they mandate this stuff? I mean, why on earth would a child, right? Why would it be mandated for a child to have an STD shot before they go into kindergarten? Like, make that make sense. Like, let's show up at Congress and ask a question. Can you explain to me why you find it to be necessary for a child to have an STD shot in order for them to be able to play in the same playground as other 5-year-olds? You're not going to tell me that's about anybody's health. That is about a $1 trillion industry that has been going on and that has been corrupt from its inception. So people are realizing it now because we have social media, because we can talk, because you are all shocked watching how extreme the government, the extreme hoops that the government jumped through, attempting to mandate these shots for children right now pertaining to COVID, despite the overwhelming data that shows you, you can look it up yourselves. Kids are not at risk for COVID. I'm not at risk for COVID. I shouldn't be mandated to take a COVID shot. If you want to get it. Do your thing. If and then the lies and the changing of the data, the promise that, when you get it, you're not going to be able to capture or spread it. Suddenly goalposts moved, right? You watched in real time, goalposts moved. Oh, we meant, it's just going to prevent you from getting severely ill. Oh, we meant, and at no point Is our government honest enough to question whether or not the vaccines are even effective? You watched the cover-ups. You've watched that they won't even talk to you about natural immunity. They don't have a discussion. You want to know why? Because natural immunity is not going to earn them trillions of dollars. You've watched Big Pharma mint 9 new billionaires. I mean, if you want to talk about crony capitalism, if you want to talk about complete and utter corruption, in fact, the opposite of capitalism, right? Crony capitalism is more akin to socialism, right? You're either in or you're out. You're either with the government or you're not. When you want to talk about that, talk about the fact that these companies are able to, imagine if you were just like an entrepreneur and you created a product, right? And then you went to politicians and you said, I want you to mandate that every single person in the country has to buy my product. And the politicians did it.